Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. In today's video, I'm doing some vintage style books using IOD stamps. For today's projects, I'm going to be repurposing this hardcover book that I thrifted for $1, and I'm going to first of all lay down this sort of taupey sort of color. I really needed to tone down the blue on the cover because I'm going to be putting fabric over the top, and you'd be able to see the blue tone and the gold lettering if I didn't do this. You could also use a primer for this. I just needed a light color. I did one coat and then I let my chalk paint dry, and then I took out this calico sort of style fabric that I thrifted, and I'm just working out how much of it I'm going to have to cut out to cover the book. So I've got it laid down and I'm just working out what I'm going to need to cut, and then I'm going to trim it to size. Now I'm going to be doing 3 books, but I'm not going to be showing you this exact process each time. I then took out my iron and I gave it an iron. This is just a little craft iron. I then took out the book and my hot glue gun, and I started to open up the book and apply some hot glue to the inside. And you definitely want to work in sections because obviously the hot glue can dry pretty quick. I then wrapped one edge of the fabric over one side of the book, pressing it down firmly. And then I opened the book back up, added a strip of hot glue on the other end, pulled the fabric tight, and then applied pressure to make sure it was all stuck down. Next, I'm going to use my scissors to cut the fabric near the spine so that I can glue down that fold of fabric. I did trim off some of the excess there, and now I'm just applying some more hot glue so that I can fold that fabric up. You'll see each time I pull the book cover up so that the fabric will be firm and hopefully very, very few wrinkles. So I've glued that part down. Now I'm going to repeat the same process on the other side, gluing that fabric down and making sure again that I'm pulling it tight. Next, I'm going to make another cut near the spine of the book, and then I'm going to stand the book up and I'm going to trim off that excess that you see coming out the top there, and then I will use my hot glue gun to glue that fabric down in place. I'm then going to be repeating the same process on the other end of the book. So I won't be showing this process for each of the books. I just felt like that would be a bit too repetitive. I do have another video that I did quite some time ago where I covered books with drop cloth. That's another option if you don't have this calico sort of style fabric. But I really wanted to give these books quite a vintage feel, and the tone of this fabric and the fibers that were in it definitely lent itself to a vintage botanical book, something very well worn, something that a botanist or a gardener would have collected over time. Once I'd finished covering the 3 books, I took out IOD's new garden bouquet stamp. I've already seasoned this with some 220 grit sandpaper, and now I'm going to select this lovely daisy stamp design. I'm peeling that off the backing, and I'm going to be using the plastic sheet that comes with it as my mount. And then I'm going to take out IOD's permanent black ink, and I'm going to ink it up really well. You always want to use a little bit more ink when you're going to be stamping into fabric. You also want to make sure that you go back in with a wet wipe if you've got any excess ink. I'm then going to position it where I want it to go. I want this to go in the center, down the bottom, and then I'm going to press down. You are going to want to apply more pressure than you would on any other surface. You want that fabric to really soak it up, and I've got one hand holding it in place while the other hand moves around and applies pressure. I did check it a few times by gently lifting it up, and then once I'm happy with it, I'll lift it up all the way. I then took out IOD's Ephemeral type stamp, and this is one of the texts that come in that pack, and I'm just inking up the design up the top, and then I'm going to use a wet wipe to pull back the ink from where I don't want it to go. So I'm using this as a title for the book. Again, I'm pressing it down quite firmly, always having one hand holding it in place and then lifting it straight up. I'm then going to add some ink to the same stamp design down the bottom, and I'm wiping off some of the excess, and then I'm going to position that underneath the title design and press down. I just thought it would be fun to add the year underneath. I'm then going to ink up that same stamp, but I'm going to be adding ink to the entire design, and I'm going to be adding this to the back of the book. I just want something on the back. It doesn't need to be super decorative, just to have something there to make it look like it's the blurb on the back of a book. So again, pressing really firmly and then pulling the design straight up. For the spine of the book, I'm going to ink up the top word there, just like we had on the front of the book. I'm going to pull back any of the excess ink, and then I'm just going to press that on the spine. Definitely go slow when you're doing this. I don't have it on a backer because I want to be able to manipulate this to the surface a bit better. So just pressing down firmly and then pulling it straight up. I then decided to ink up the bottom section where it says Paris, and I'm going to pull back some of that ink there, and I'm going to be positioning that further down on the spine to make it look like maybe this is where the book was published. Once the ink had been drying for several hours, I took out Couture's Basil chalk paint, and I'm just going to be adding that to the stems and the leaves of the floral design. Now I am dabbing off most of the paint onto a wet wipe. I also haven't stirred my paint really well, so it's a little bit watery at this point. If you wanted, you could water down your paint by adding just a little bit of paint and a little bit of water together, but I really want it to be quite thin because I still want to be able to see the details of the stamped design. So I'm just sort of dabbing it in. I don't need to have full coverage here. I just really wanted to add some color to this to give it more of that vintage botanical book look, but we don't want it to be super bright, as I'm definitely going for that vintage aged look. Next, I want to add some color to the petals of the daisies. So I picked out this really creamy, very light yellow chalk paint that I had in my stash. And again, I'm dabbing off the excess on a wet wipe. So I've got that water that's sort of toning it down and watering it down. And I'm just dabbing it onto the details of the petals. Next, I took out Couture's light brown sugar glaze, and I am again offloading the excess onto a wet wipe, and I'm going to just dab that in the center part of the daisy flower there. Again, going really light here. We just want a hint of color. When I was done, I then used my hairdryer to really dry everything out and heat set that ink and that paint. I really want this to have a vintage look, so I'm going to dip a wet wipe into my light brown sugar antiquing glaze, and I'm sort of rubbing it together to tone it down, and then I'm going to come in and start dabbing some of that product onto the book. It's a little bit tricky to see, but it definitely gave the book a bit more of a worn look. It was definitely very subtle. I didn't want it to be too obvious. I wanted it to look like age spots, and maybe it had even been out in the garden while someone was using it for reference in their garden. So I'm really going around the edges and the spine and anywhere that I think age would accumulate. And then I did also go in and just sort of dab in random spots, again, to give the appearance of age spots. If you don't have access to glaze, you could try using a watered down brown paint mix for this step. You might be able to achieve a similar look. Next, I took out some twine, and I'm going to measure out 3 lengths that are just a little bit longer than the book. I'm going to measure out 3 of those, cut them to the same size, and then I'm going to tie a knot up the top to hold them in place. I'm actually going to be plaiting this twine. I want to put a twine detail down the side of the book. I thought doing a plait in the twine would be a nice little detail to add a bit of a different texture, give it a bit of warmth. And so I'm just going to continue to plait it until I have the whole length plaited so that it's long enough to go down the side of the book. And then I'm going to secure it in place with some hot glue. So I'm just going to add it to the top section of the book there, trim off the excess, and just sort of really poke that twine in to make it look a bit tidier. And then I'm going to put a strip of hot glue along along the side of the spine of the book and then press the plaited twine into the hot glue, and then I will flip it around the other way and glue the other end of the twine to the bottom of the book. And here's a look at our finished daisy book. I'm really pleased with how this turned out. Those stamps are so beautiful and it was so fun to paint them. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For the second book, I'm going to be using the rose stamp design in that same stamp pack. I'm putting it on that plastic sheet that we used before. I'm then going to ink it up with IOD's permanent black ink. You can see that I already have my book ready to go. It's covered in that calico. And then I'm going to position the roses in the center down the bottom part of the book, and I'm pressing hard. Now, I was sure to press even harder in the sections where there was a little bit of an indent from the spine, and I just really wanted to try and get as much of those details as possible, and then I lifted it straight up. I'm going to use that same Basil chalk paint by Paint Couture on the leaf and stems of the roses, again using that wet wipe to offload the excess and give it a bit more of a almost watercolor consistency. And I'm just going to continue to add that until I have all of the green details painted in. Next, I took out a red chalk paint and again dabbing off that excess, and I'm just going to start dabbing it into the details of the roses. Now, this color was a little bit trickier to water down and to get a nice consistency. So once I had added some of that paint, I did bring out my water mister, and I just put a little bit of water on top of the chalk paint to try and water it down and get it to spread a little bit better, and that definitely helped. And then I also decided to come in with a wet wipe shortly as well. I felt that helped to spread the paint a bit better. So it was definitely a bit of a learning experience using the red. The fabric took it a little bit different than the green or the cream that we used before. So I definitely had to sort of just trust the process here. And the red did end up obscuring some of the ink details, but honestly, I'm going for a vintage look here, a faded sort of a look. So overall, I was happy with how the red roses turned out. And guys, I was not game to do the stamp over the top of it again. I just didn't want to make a mistake. Just like with the first book, I took out IOD's Ephemeral type stamp, and I'm going to ink up the lettering up the top there. I'm going to wipe off that excess, and that is going to function as the title of our book. I know there's a bit of repetition here, but I felt like these could definitely be a set of books or a collection of books that had similar titles but had that different sort of focus on the different flowers. I also added in the date underneath, just like we did with the first book as well. On the back, I also added the same typed detail on the back as well, keeping it pretty simple because I am envisioning that these will lay on a coffee table or sort of stand on a shelf, so I don't think it's that important that the back is super interesting. So once I had done that, I also then added the same sort of detail to the spine like we had on the first one. If you wanted, and this was a little bit too repetitive for you, IOD do have the Apothecary labels stamp set with smaller lettering, so you definitely could come in and make up your own labels for your books. I was just really trying to keep this simple and just to use these two beautiful new stamps from IOD. I then decided to ink up another design to go down the bottom to sort of overlap the rose detail, and I really like how this sort of feels like it finishes it off. I'm then going to do the same technique with the light brown sugar antiquing glaze, just running that over the top of the book on a wet wipe. Using the wet wipe definitely softens it, and it gives you a little bit more control and freedom to add as much or as little as you like, and it definitely does give that lovely convincing sort of age spot look here. You can see I'm just sort of dabbing it on. I'm then going to do just like we did with the first book. I'm going to attach the plaited twine. I already have that plaited and ready to go, and I'm going to glue that in place. And here's a look at our finished rose book. I am really pleased with how this turned out. The red is definitely a bit more of a challenge, but it was definitely worth giving it a go. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For my final book, I'm going to be using the Hydrangea stamp that's in that same stamp pack. I'm inking it up really well. I already have my book covered and ready to go. I'm going to wipe off that excess ink, and then I am going to flip the carrier sheet over and then press the design down. This is such a beautiful stamp. It is just so lovely and detailed. So just really pressing it into any of the indents on the book there, and then when I'm happy with that, I will lift it straight up. Next, I'm going to be using that same Basil chalk paint by Couture to paint in the leaf details there. And again, I am pulling back some of that excess paint. Sometimes it's going to be a bit heavier than others, and that definitely does give a bit more of a watercolor feel. And you could definitely try using watercolor with the fabric. That would definitely be worth a go. Once I finished adding the green, I took out my custom mix here that I made using Couture's Purple Haze and Cozy Beige, and I'm just going to start dabbing that onto the hydrangeas. Now, hydrangeas often have quite a few different sort of tones and hues, so I'm dabbing it on, not going for an even coverage, and I'm also using a wet wipe to pull back some of the intensity in certain areas. I'm pressing lighter in others. I didn't really think too much about it. I just went in and applied the paint until I had the coverage that I wanted. I then took out that same ephemeral type stamp. This time, however, I'm only going to have the 2 words up the top because the hydrangeas do take up a lot more room than the other stamps did. I'm going to press that down up the top. That will be our title. And then I am going to ink up the bottom part of the same stamp design, pull back any of the areas that I don't want, and I'm going to layer that over the other stamp that we've done and just press down firmly. I'm then going to be inking up the same design for the back cover, just like we did with the others. I know it's quite repetitive, but I felt like it was still very helpful to see the different steps that I was doing. And then I'm going to add the same stamps to the spine of the book. As I said before, I envisioned this as sort of like a botanical collection. If you wanted to change it up, you could definitely use different stamps, or you could even come with stencils or transfers. I'm then going to be doing the same technique with the glaze on the wet wipe to dab onto the book and give it some age. You could always leave this step out if this was a little bit too much for you. You don't like the weathered and worn look. You could definitely leave it, or you could go even heavier if you want it to be a bit darker, a bit grungy. It just depends what look you're going for. I'm then going to add a line of glue and glue down that plaited twine that I already have ready to go. I really like this detail. You can leave this out if this isn't to your taste, or you could wrap it around the book instead. I just felt like it brought in a lovely different texture. And here's our finished hydrangea book. I'm really pleased with how this turned out. The paint on the hydrangea petals definitely looks quite realistic. Let me know what you think of this one in the comments. I really hope that you've enjoyed today's video and that it's given you an idea on how you can use IOD stamps and thrifted books to make some decor for your home. Let me know if you had a favorite book from today. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of our videos. You can find most of the products used today on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Thanks for watching.